Welcome to Sleepy Scholar, where time slows down and history becomes a lullaby. Come sit beside me here by the crackling fire. The light is low, the world is quiet, and the past is waiting to whisper its stories. Rest your head, get cozy, and let's journey together across windswept mountains and ancient stone paths to a wall so vast it weaves through centuries. Tonight, we walk along the Great Wall of China, where every stone holds a memory, and every breeze carries the echoes of emperors, soldiers, and silent watchtowers under starlit skies. Long before stone met mortar, and before towers stood in silent rhythm across northern China, there was only land. Rolling hills, soft grasslands, and ancient mountains brushed by wind. It was a place of open sky, a place of quiet steps taken by shepherds and travelers long forgotten. The Great Wall of China, as we know it today, had not yet begun. But the land was already whispering its story. In these early times, different peoples moved across the wide expanse of the Chinese heartland. Nomadic tribes, settled farmers, and small kingdoms coexisted, sometimes peacefully, sometimes in quiet rivalry. Life followed the rhythm of seasons. In the north, winds carried the dust of the steppes, while to the south, rivers wound lazily through valleys, feeding the first rice fields and villages. Before a single stone of the Great Wall was placed, there were barriers, not grand, but practical. Wooden palisades, earth mounds, and shallow moats surrounded early towns and cities. These were not meant to mark empires, but to gently separate home from unknown. They offered a sense of boundary, of safety. As these early communities grew, so too did their need to watch the horizon. In the 7th century BCE, during a time known as the Spring and Autumn period and later the Warring States period, different regions of China began to build their own walls. These were simple structures, tamped earth, low and winding, following the contour of hills. They marked the edges of small kingdoms like Qi, Zhao, and Yan. These walls were not yet one, but scattered lines of care built by people looking to guard their harvests, their homes, their way of life. Imagine one of those early mornings, the sun rising over mist-covered grasslands, a line of earth walls in the distance, barely higher than a man running across a ridge. Farmers carrying baskets on their shoulders, children playing near the gates. The wall was part of their world, not feared, but familiar. It stood not as a declaration of power, but as a gentle measure of belonging. As time passed, these walls grew longer. Where one ended, another began. They were built with soil packed layer upon layer, sometimes with wooden reinforcements or stones at the base. Men worked in quiet teams, pressing the earth down with wooden rammers, moving slowly along ridges. All was guided by the lay of the land. But these early walls were still separate, each belonging to a different state, like strands of thread yet to be woven together. And so, the idea of a unified wall, one that stretched across the land, linking mountains to desert and forest to field, had not yet formed. It would take a new vision, a larger unity, for such a dream to take shape. The Qin dynasty, centuries later, would become the force to attempt it. But for now, the earth lay in patient silence. The people watched the sky, and the early lines of protection, though humble, carried within them the first quiet echoes of what would become one of the most enduring symbols of human determination. In the stillness of history, the land waited. The land has always waited. The story of the Great Wall does not begin with emperors or battles, but with the simple, steady life of early people, with their small fires at dusk, with their wooden homes clustered together, with their gaze cast toward the horizon, wondering what lay beyond the next rise. It was this quiet wonder, this desire to protect what was cherished, to understand what was unknown, that would one day rise into walls that touched the clouds. But for now, in the softness of ancient time, the ground remained mostly undisturbed. The wall had not yet come, but its foundation, not of stone but of intention, had already been laid. And in this beginning there is peace. By the time the 3rd century BCE arrived, China was no longer a patchwork of warring states, but a land in the midst of transformation. The gentle hills and scattered palisades of earlier times gave way to something new, a single empire rising under the vision of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. His name is often spoken in tales of great change, but tonight we speak quietly of his quiet ambition. Not the kind that shouts from rooftops, but the kind that organizes stone, road, and sky into something enduring. It was under his reign that the idea of a unified wall, no longer isolated fortifications, but a continuous line, began to take gentle shape. Qin Shi Huang was not building from nothing. He took what already existed, the walls of earlier kingdoms, and began the process of linking them together. Like careful stitches in a long tapestry, his engineers and laborers extended and connected the earthworks, reinforcing them, aligning their paths. In the north, where the wind rolled across wide plains, this effort unfolded not with thunder, but with rhythm. One stone placed after another, tools rising and falling, steps crunching softly across packed soil. The materials of this early construction were simple, drawn from the land itself. Rammed earth was the foundation, layer upon layer, pressed and shaped with wooden frames. The earth was not just dirt, it was memory, labor, and patience, mixed with straw and time. Each step forward brought the wall farther into being, not as a symbol of separation, but as a shape on the land, an outline, a pause, a way to feel safe. Imagine for a moment the scene. It is morning, the kind of morning where the mist lingers just a little longer than expected. A team of workers begins their day. They're not soldiers, but ordinary men from villages nearby. Farmers, potters, shepherds, called to lend their hands. They move slowly but steadily, guided by quiet foremen who speak sparingly, pointing to where the earth needs packing, where a curve must follow the ridge. There are no grand machines, only tools made of wood and iron, ropes stretched taut, and baskets passed from hand to hand. The rhythm is almost musical. A rammer thuds. A breath is taken. A new layer begins. The work is hard, but not chaotic. It moves like a slow tide. Alongside the wall, simple towers began to rise. These were not the stone watchtowers of later dynasties, but humble structures built of timber and earth, offering height and view. From these vantage points, the surrounding landscape could be seen, not in conquest, but in careful observation. The horizon became familiar. The trees and hills, once distant, now felt nearer, known. Qin's wall stretched over 1,000 miles. It wound across mountains, deserts, and open plains. It did not form one clean, continuous line. Rather, it branched, curved, and paused, shaped by geography and need. It was a living thing, adapting to its surroundings. The purpose, though often framed in defense, was also administrative. The wall became a thread of connection, guiding travelers, supporting outposts, offering pathways for messengers. In its quiet way, it helped to stitch the empire together. The work was not finished in a single season. It continued slowly, year by year, long after Qin Shi Huang's passing. And though parts of the early wall would later fade or crumble, its spirit endured. It had become a presence, not always visible, but always felt. Back in the towns and villages, people spoke of the wall in practical terms. It was a direction, a landmark, a story told by grandparents. Children played near its base, traders rested in its shade, and the workers, when their tasks were done, returned home with hands dusty but hearts steady. They had helped build something that reached beyond their own lifetimes. As night fell across the northern frontier, the wind would sometimes carry the soft creak of a wooden tower or the low murmur of a soldier on watch. The wall stood still, quiet under moonlight. It did not move, but it held space for safety, for memory, for peace. And so the rise of the boundary was not only a feat of stone and earth, it was an unfolding of intent, of many hands joining in quiet labor across distance and time. It was an answer to the question, how do we live safely together across a vast land? It began not with force, but with care. And in this way, the Great Wall, in its earliest form, began to breathe with the land. Centuries passed gently, and as the dust of time settled over northern China, dynasties rose and fell like quiet waves. The wall, once a simple line of rammed earth and watchful eyes, rested in sections weathered by wind, softened by moss, and watched over by silence. Then, in the 14th century, a new power arrived with a steady hand and a grand vision. The Ming Dynasty emerged, and with it came a revival, not just of governance and trade, but of the wall itself. The time of stone and brick had come. The Mongol Empire had ruled before the Ming, and the scars of their strength still lingered in memory. Though peace had returned, there was a need to feel secure, to form a gentle buffer between the land within and the unknown beyond. And so, the Great Wall began to transform, not as a relic of the past, but as a centerpiece of Ming stability. This was no hurried endeavor. It was a slow, intentional orchestration of labor and material stretched across nearly 300 years. The wall the Ming would build was stronger, taller, and more enduring than any before. Where Qin's earth walls once stood, brick and stone would now rise, gray, smooth, carefully laid, and meant to last. Imagine the construction site under the calm morning sun. Cool air drifts over the foothills. Workers gather in teams, dressed in linen and wool, their hands wrapped in cloth. There is no shouting, no urgency, only the quiet flow of a practiced routine. Stone is shaped, bricks are passed from hand to hand, and mortar is mixed with ash, lime, and care. The Ming Wall was not merely a barrier, it became a highway of communication and support. Along its length, thousands of watchtowers were constructed. They stood like silent guardians, evenly spaced, rectangular, and hollow within. From these towers, soldiers could see far into the horizon, and signal fires could carry messages with soft flickers of light, leaping from one post to the next. Beacon towers, built taller and stronger, served as early warning systems. A single puff of smoke in daylight or a torch at night would ripple across the wall's length, a message carried not by voice, but by pattern and flame. It was communication in its simplest, most elegant form. The wall became more than stone. It became a road. Inside the wall, narrow pathways allowed soldiers to move quickly along its top. Supply routes brought grain and water. Barracks were built at intervals, and storerooms nestled within the mountainside. The structure felt less like a wall and more like a living spine across the landscape. And the landscape itself played its part. The wall twisted and climbed with the terrain, never forcing its way, but following the contours like a river of gray and silver. In places, it dipped into valleys where gentle rivers flowed. In others, it climbed steep ridges where only mountain goats dared to wander. The most iconic sections near modern-day Beijing showcase the refined Ming construction. The stonework is tight and even. The parapets rise in even waves with gentle arches that cast long shadows. On quiet days, the wall seems to whisper to the hills, a conversation of stone and silence. At night, under the stars, sentries would walk the wall with lanterns in hand. The flame would dance lightly in the glass, casting warm glows on the stone path. Beneath them, the vast land stretched in all directions. Villages in the distance, forests rustling softly, and the occasional call of a night bird echoing from below. But the soldiers were not always tense. Often their duties were simple. They brewed tea in small clay pots. They wrote letters home by oil lamp. Some carved their names in the bricks, small traces of presence that still remained centuries later. Despite its scale, the Great Wall was not impenetrable. Raiders could sometimes pass, and the world beyond the bricks remained complex. But the wall served another purpose, one of psychological assurance. It offered a sense of stability, a promise that someone was watching the horizon, that behind its line of stone, life could continue with rhythm and calm. Trade routes flourished, and the wall protected more than territory. It safeguarded culture, language, and shared memory. Towns near the wall became places of quiet commerce. Travelers rested at its side. Pilgrims paused in its shade. The Great Wall became both destination and passage. And so, under the guidance of the Ming Dynasty, the Great Wall matured into the form we know today, not just as a line on a map, but as an enduring symbol of intention, crafted with patience, and built to last beyond the lives of those who laid its stones. As the wind blew across its ridges, the wall stood still, a quiet testament to generations of thoughtful hands and watching eyes. While the stones of the Great Wall stretched across thousands of miles, it was the life that flowed beside and within it that gave the structure a quiet rhythm. Beyond the battles of history and the sweep of dynasties, everyday people lived, worked, and rested in its long shadow, their lives gently shaped by its presence. Along the length of the wall, small villages dotted the countryside. Some had been there before the wall was built, others grew up beside it, like ivy along a garden wall. The wall offered protection, but also connection. Traders, farmers, travelers, and guards moved alongside it, sharing stories, goods, and moments under the same wide sky. In the early mornings, these villages would stir with a certain softness. Smoke would rise gently from clay chimneys. Roosters called in the distance. And if one stood at a vantage point on the wall itself, the view would be simple and serene. Neat patches of farmland stretching out like woven fabric, dotted with thatched rooftops and narrow dirt paths. The people here had a closeness to the land. In spring and summer, families would tend their crops, millet, wheat, and vegetables adapted to the dry northern climate. Children would gather wild herbs along the rocky slopes. In autumn, harvests were gathered in quiet celebration. And in winter, life slowed. The wind blew colder across the hills, and snow gathered softly along the battlements, dusting the stones in white. Soldiers stationed on the wall became part of this rhythm. Though their role was to guard and report, many stayed in one place long enough to know the farmers by name, to share meals in village homes, and to rest under the same tiled roofs during festivals. They became familiar figures, not ominous, but steady. Each watchtower became more than just a lookout post. Inside, there might be a table, a few wooden stools, a kettle for boiling tea, and perhaps a scroll of poetry tucked away in someone's pack. Some brought musical instruments, a bamboo flute or a stringed guqin. On quiet nights, their soft notes would drift across the valley, joining the wind in a peaceful duet. Food was simple, but nourishing. Soldiers and villagers alike ate steamed buns, pickled vegetables, and brothy soups flavored with ginger and garlic. In colder regions, hearty dumplings and preserved meats were shared during communal meals. During festivals like the Lunar New Year, red lanterns would glow gently from windows, and the wall itself, in some areas, would be adorned with paper decorations that fluttered in the breeze. Water was gathered from nearby springs or collected rain and stored in earthen jars. Animals, goats, chickens, and dogs wandered freely in and around the villages, providing both company and sustenance. The seasons painted the wall in different moods. In spring, green grass crept up to its base, and birds nested in the crevices between stones. In summer, the sun warmed the bricks until they held the heat of the day. Fall brought gold and rust-colored leaves drifting softly across the battlements. Winter hushed the world, blanketing the path in white and turning breath into clouds. Despite the grandeur of the structure, life along the wall was often quiet and repetitive. Days blended into one another with a slow comfort. People repaired what they could, mended clothing, read when scrolls were available, and watched the stars as night settled in. Occasionally, travelers passed through. Some were merchants, leading camels burdened with bolts of silk or bundles of herbs. Others were monks on pilgrimage, walking barefoot and offering blessings. These brief encounters added sparks of novelty to the lives of those living near the wall, each traveler bringing stories of places far away, deserts, rivers, cities lit with lanterns. Children would gather near the road to watch them pass, wide-eyed and curious. Elders, seated on worn stools, would sip tea and remember their own travels or younger days on the wall. Stories would be shared by the firelight, not of war or conquest, but of weather, family, and small adventures. A storm that blew through the past, a rare bird sighted near a tower, the time someone saw snow in midsummer. In the stillness of night, the wall held its vigil. Stars shimmered overhead, and sometimes the moon cast silver light across the stones. Lanterns flickered in the towers, each flame a sign of presence, of someone watching, waiting, caring for what lay beyond. Over time, many of these villages faded or moved. The purpose of the wall, too, shifted. But for generations, it had been a living part of people's world, not just a monument, but a backdrop to quiet, enduring lives. To walk along the wall in these moments was not to witness only history, but to feel the echoes of everyday life, of laughter carried on the breeze, of footsteps on stone, and of a world gently turning under a watchful sky. The Great Wall of China, vast and winding, does not speak, but it holds the memory of centuries. It stands even now like a long, thoughtful pause across the landscape, a quiet echo of the many lives and eras it has witnessed. As we reach the final part of our journey, let us not focus on stone and mortar alone, but on the gentle passing of time and the wall's place within it. In the centuries after its most active use, the Great Wall slowly settled into the Earth's rhythm. Without the urgency of patrols and alarms, many of its watchtowers grew still. Wind passed through empty corridors, and wildflowers pushed their way through the cracks in its pathways. Birds nested in the crevices where guards once stood, and travelers walked along its length, not in defense, but in quiet admiration. During the Ming Dynasty, the wall had reached its strongest form, but as dynasties rose and fell, the need for constant fortification faded. Still, the people living near it continued to regard it with respect. It was no longer just a tool of defense, but a monument of their heritage, a reminder of their ancestors' labor and endurance. Over time, parts of the wall disappeared into forests or were gently dismantled. Local villagers sometimes took stones to build homes or barns. This wasn't done with disrespect, but with practicality. The wall, in its way, continued to support lives even as it aged, becoming part of hearths, doorsteps, and paths leading into the hills. Centuries passed, and with each generation, stories about the wall took root. Some said it could be seen from the moon. Others believed it held ancient secrets, or that it curved like a dragon sleeping across the mountains. Folklore gave the wall new life, painting it with dreams and myths that gently settled over the historical truth. In the quiet of dusk, storytellers in village squares would speak of emperors who built the wall with a single command, or of bricks carried by hand across thousands of miles. Children would listen, eyes wide, as they imagined distant lands and brave workers singing as they laid stone after stone. These stories, told with affection and wonder, helped the wall stay alive in the minds of those who came after. As centuries turned into the modern age, the world began to look at the Great Wall with new eyes. Historians studied it. Travelers wrote about it in books. Artists painted it with delicate strokes, capturing its rise and fall along the ridges. It became a symbol, not of division, but of endurance, a testament to what humans can build not just with tools, but with time. In the 20th century, preservation efforts began. Sections of the wall were restored with care, honoring the craftsmanship of long ago. Visitors came not in haste, but in reverence. They walked its winding length slowly, often in silence, feeling the weight of history in the worn steps and weathered stones. Some came to photograph the sunrise as it painted the wall in soft gold. Others sat quietly on a ledge, letting their thoughts wander. For many, the wall was not just a destination, but a moment, a place to reflect, to breathe, and to connect with something far larger than themselves. Nature, too, has remained a constant companion to the wall. Pine trees stand beside it like quiet sentinels. Mist sometimes rolls across its towers, making them look like islands in a drifting sea. In spring, wild blossoms grow beside its foundation. In autumn, golden leaves fall like whispers over its path. The wall and the land move gently through the seasons together, both shaped by time. Today, the Great Wall of China is recognized as a World Heritage Site, not just for its size, but for its story. It reminds us that even the grandest achievements are made stone by stone, hour by hour. That endurance often comes not with noise, but with quiet persistence. That history is not only written in books, but held in the curve of a path, the pattern of a brick, and the shadows cast by towers at dusk. As our journey draws to a close, imagine yourself standing once more on a stretch of the wall, far from cities and sound. The sky above is soft with stars. The air is cool and still. You look out over the landscape and everything seems at rest. The mountains, the wall, and your own thoughts. You may hear only the faint rustling of wind through dry grass or the distant call of a night bird. And in that moment, you're not thinking of centuries or dynasties. You're simply there, present, quiet, at peace. The Great Wall of China remains, not as a barrier, but as a memory made real. A gentle reminder of the people who came before us and the long, slow beauty of time. In the gentle folds of the English countryside, nestled alongside the slow-moving River Avon, there lies a quiet town called Stratford. The year was 1564. Trees swayed in the soft spring breeze, and the first hints of green returned to the hedgerows. In a timbered house on Henley Street, a child was born, a boy who would in time become one of the most cherished voices in human history. His name was William Shakespeare. His father, John, was a glove maker by trade, a respected craftsman who also served on the town council. His mother, Mary Arden, came from a family of modest landowners and brought with her a touch of gentle refinement from her rural upbringing. Their home was warm, filled with the scent of cured leather and the faint trace of ink and parchment. Life in Stratford was simple but rhythmic, moving with the steady cycles of planting, harvest, and prayer. William's early years were shaped by the subtle music of nature, the calls of birds, the babbling of streams, the rustle of leaves beneath small feet as he wandered through meadows and woodland paths. His days would have begun with the tolling of the church bell, calling the town to morning mass, and ended with the soft orange glow of sunset slipping over the rooftops. He was likely educated at the King's New School, a grammar school that sat quietly near the church. There, young boys were taught Latin, the poetry of Virgil and Ovid, and the graceful art of rhetoric. It was not a noisy classroom, but one where thought and silence held equal space. Words became companions to William, words from far-off lands, from stories of old, carried gently across centuries and into his curious mind. As a boy, he may have sat beneath the wide sky, reading by candlelight, or simply watching the clouds pass, wondering at the vastness of life beyond Stratford. His world was small, but not limited. Evenings would bring the distant clop of horse hooves along cobbled lanes, or the muffled laughter of villagers gathering in taverns. It was a world of stories, shared in whispers, in fireside tales, in the murmur of the wind through hedges. Though few records survive from these early years, the stillness of that life can almost be felt today. One can imagine the scent of damp earth after rain, or the hush that settled over Stratford during winter nights, when snow blanketed the fields and the hearth became a family's central light. At just 18, William married Anne Hathaway, a woman 8 years his senior. Her cottage, nestled in the nearby village of Shottery, remains today, a reminder of simplicity and love. They had 3 children together, Susanna and the twins, Hamnet and Judith. Life became more complex, but never hurried. There were joys and sorrows, as in any home, but always a foundation of steady devotion. For reasons we can only guess, Shakespeare eventually left for London, a move that would shift the course of his life forever. But Stratford never left him. The town, with its gentle hills, quiet lanes, and the familiar cadence of the river, would echo through his plays. His roots, planted deep in English soil, would nourish every verse he wrote. In those early years, before the fame and the stages, William Shakespeare was simply a boy in a small town, listening, reading, wondering. The world he saw was rich, not in gold, but in texture. The creak of wooden doors, the softness of wool, the laughter of siblings, the flicker of candlelight on stone. And it is in this stillness that we find the beginnings of a voice that would one day speak across centuries. Not with thunder, but with a whisper, as soothing as a lullaby drifting through the English night. As the 1580s faded gently into the next decade, the world around William Shakespeare began to change. The soft countryside of Warwickshire, though still dear to him, gave way to the distant hum of a bustling city, London. He was in his 20s when he made his quiet way there, perhaps on foot, perhaps by cart, following winding roads lined with hedgerows, market towns, and sleepy inns. London was no sleepy town. It was lively, crowded, and ever-shifting, but for Shakespeare, it was a place of opportunity. Here, the voices of merchants, actors, and poets floated above the Thames, mixing with the calls of birds, the bells of churches, and the shuffle of people moving through narrow lanes. The city had a pulse, a rhythm of its own, and somewhere in that cadence, William found his place. He entered the world of theater, not with fanfare, but gradually, perhaps first as an actor or a script adapter. He would have found himself among the wooden stages and open-air playhouses that dotted the city. One such theater, the Curtain, became an early platform for his work. It was not yet the famed Globe, but it was a place where language took flight. Shakespeare began writing plays during this time, each one a careful blend of poetic thought and human emotion. Henry VI was among his earliest, likely performed before modest crowds under cloudy English skies. The stories he told were drawn from history and legend, yet they spoke with startling freshness. His words were both ancient and entirely new. He joined a troupe of players called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, a company supported by royal patronage. This group of actors would become his collaborators for much of his career. They performed for commoners and nobles alike, and even for Queen Elizabeth I. Their shared commitment to the stage created a quiet kind of fellowship, one built on trust, timing, and the shared breath of performance. In 1599, the company built a new theater, the Globe. It rose beside the Thames like a great wooden circle open to the sky. By day, it echoed with applause and the sound of actors' voices. By night, it returned to stillness, the wind whispering through its rafters. It was there that some of Shakespeare's most treasured plays would first be heard. Despite his growing reputation, Shakespeare remained a figure of mystery. He did not seek public acclaim or stir controversy. He worked steadily, often drawn from classical texts, folk tales, and the quiet observations of daily life. His genius lay not in spectacle, but in the delicate way he captured thought, emotion, and silence between words. Outside of the theater, London itself left an impression on him. The Thames flowed steadily through the city, a mirror to time. The narrow alleys and busy markets hummed with the stories of thousands, lovers, soldiers, beggars, queens. Shakespeare listened, and from that listening, he wrote. During these years, he also published poems such as Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece. These were more formal works, rich in classical allusion, admired by fellow poets and the educated elite. Yet even in these pages, his style remained gentle, lush in imagery, but never heavy. London seasons came and went. Winters brought a hush, a quieting of the streets beneath snowfall. Summers were brighter, the air scented with blossoms and the faint trace of river mist. Through it all, Shakespeare continued to write, his quill moving across parchment by candlelight. He crafted stories of love, honor, loss, and laughter, plays like a midsummer night's dream, where fairies drifted through enchanted woods, and Romeo and Juliet, where whispered words met the soft glow of moonlight. By the early 1600s, his name had become known, not shouted from rooftops, but spoken with respect in circles of readers, patrons, and playgoers. And still, he remained grounded, a craftsman of verse, a quiet observer of the world around him. In the theater, he gave voice to kings and clowns, to shepherds and spirits. On the page, he etched moments of stillness, a hand held in love, a sigh on the breeze, the space between two lines of verse. And though he lived in a city brimming with noise, he offered his audience something gentler, a pause, a reflection, a story softly told. And so, as London turned slowly beneath stars and lamplight, William Shakespeare's voice emerged, not in thunder or trumpet, but in the gentle unfolding of words that spoke to every soul. As the early 1600s unfolded with gentle certainty, William Shakespeare found himself at the height of his creative powers. The London of his time continued to hum with the quiet energy of trade, the rhythm of carts over cobblestones, the voices of traders and townsfolk. Yet in the privacy of his writing chambers or the cool shade of a theater's inner room, something deeper stirred. Stories that would outlive empires, written in soft ink and firm imagination. This was the season of Shakespeare's greatest works, and while they would come to be known as timeless, they began with simple moments, perhaps the hush of early morning, a candle flickering beside him, the subtle rustle of parchment as he turned to a fresh page. He began to explore the vastness of the human spirit through characters shaped with rare insight. In Hamlet, he gave us a prince wrapped in reflection, someone who questioned not just his fate, but the nature of existence itself. The play, though filled with royal court and ghostly presence, never thundered. Instead, it pondered gently, to be or not to be, words spoken with such quiet gravity that they seemed almost a whisper from the soul. Soon after came Othello, the tale of love, jealousy, and the ease with which trust can unravel. The characters moved through moonlit chambers and shadowed thoughts, their emotions unfolding like ripples in still water. Shakespeare gave them depth, not to excite, but to reveal the still places in the heart where fear and hope reside side by side. Then there was King Lear, a story not of kings alone, but of aging, memory, and the longing for kindness. The old king's journey from pride to humility echoed like a soft wind through bare branches, his words tinged with a gentle ache of recognition. In Lear's moments of sorrow, there was no need for spectacle, just the quiet truth that even the strongest among us are softened by time. During this period, Shakespeare lived both in London and in the countryside, retreating to Stratford when the city felt too loud or troubled. The plague, which still visited the capital from time to time, would close the theaters, leaving the streets quieter, the stages dark. Yet, in those still seasons, his pen did not rest. He wrote sonnets, 154 in all. each a brief meditation on love, time, beauty, or change. They were like little lanterns, small and steady, glowing with thought. Shakespeare had become a master not only of what to say, but how to say it. His language, often soft and lilting, carried the breath of nature, rivers, stars, the turning of seasons, the blooming of flowers. In Twelfth Night, he captured the playfulness of love's mischief. In Measure for Measure, he weighed mercy against justice with the gentle hands of a philosopher. The Globe Theatre stood proudly by the river, a circle open to the sky where words lifted on voices and found their way to heart. Shakespeare's company, now under the patronage of King James I, became the King's Men, a title that brought prestige, but also a deeper sense of duty. These players would bring stories not just to the common folk, but to the royal court, where velvet and lace met poetry in candlelit halls. Shakespeare's later plays began to soften further. There was a turn toward forgiveness, reconciliation, and peace. The Winter's Tale and Cymbeline drifted through dreams and memories, their conclusions like gentle sighs. In The Tempest, perhaps his final solo work, he wrote of storms and islands, of loss and redemption. The character Prospero, a magician relinquishing power, may well have echoed something of the playwright himself. Aware that his time upon the stage was drawing to a close, yet even as the curtain slowly descended, there was no rush in his words. Shakespeare understood the beauty of stillness, the quiet after a storm, the silence between acts, the comfort of a story resolved with care. His characters were not merely voices, they were reflections of ourselves gently drawn. Lovers met beneath starlit skies, old friends reconciled with smiles, fools spoke truth wrapped in laughter, and through it all there was a steady voice, Shakespeare's, not loud or boastful, but thoughtful and kind, guiding each tale like a soft hand, leading the listener down a well-worn path. And so, in this golden period of his work, Shakespeare offered not just entertainment, but understanding, not just plays, but gentle mirrors in which anyone from queen to cobbler could see themselves. By the early 1610s, a subtle change had come over William Shakespeare's life. After decades of creating some of the most enduring stories in the English language, he began to step away from the rush of London. The city, with its theaters and taverns, its busy markets and echoing stages, had shaped much of his life's work. But now, his footsteps led him home, back to the small town of Stratford-upon-Avon. Stratford had not changed much since his youth. The River Avon still drifted through meadows and under old bridges. The timbered houses still leaned slightly toward the streets. Here, life moved more slowly. There were gardens to tend, family meals to enjoy, and long walks through fields that whispered with the sounds of birdsong and wind. Shakespeare had done well for himself. Through his work and investments, especially in real estate, he had become a man of comfortable means. He had purchased a fine house in Stratford called New Place. It was one of the largest homes in the town, with gardens, quiet rooms, and space for reflection. Within its walls, he found a gentle rhythm, mornings spent walking among dew-covered grass, afternoons of reading, and evenings with family or close friends. Though he had stepped back from public life, his pen had not fallen entirely still. Some of his final plays, such as The Tempest and The Two Noble Kinsmen, were likely written during this quieter chapter. These later works carried a softer tone, filled with reconciliation, forgiveness, and wonder. The Tempest, in particular, seemed almost a farewell. Its central figure, Prospero, laying down his staff and turning from magic much as Shakespeare himself turned from the stage. There is something deeply peaceful in imagining those final years. In Stratford, there were no crowds, no deadlines, just the steady turning of seasons and the nearness of familiar faces. His wife, Anne Hathaway, remained by his side. Their children, now grown, were finding their own paths. Their daughter, Susanna, had married a respected physician. Their other daughter, Judith, would marry in 1616, the same year her father passed away. In these quiet years, Shakespeare became not just a playwright, but a community member. He settled disputes, witnessed legal documents, and continued to be involved in the life of the town. He was not distant or aloof, simply private, content to let the loudness of fame drift quietly behind him. There is no record of him writing grand farewells or final reflections. Shakespeare's parting from the world of words was much like the man himself, calm, unannounced, and gently felt. He passed away on April 23, 1616, the same date it is believed as his birth, at the age of 52. His death was quiet, and the cause remains uncertain, though there is no suggestion of suffering or unrest. He was laid to rest in the chancel of Holy Trinity Church, the very church where he had been baptized more than 5 decades earlier. The stone above his grave bears a simple inscription, one that asks passers-by to let him rest undisturbed. It is not grand or flowery, but peaceful, a fitting, close to a life of thoughtful creation. Even in death, Shakespeare remained grounded in the community where his story began. The bells of Stratford rang as they always had, and the river continued its slow journey past meadows and hedges. For those who had known him as a neighbor, a father, a friend, his passing was felt not as the end of a legend, but as the gentle farewell of someone who had simply walked a little ahead. And so, in those final years, William Shakespeare did not chase greatness. He embraced stillness. He let the noise of fame soften into silence, and in that silence, he found peace. The plays remained, the poems endured, but the man himself became part of the land he had loved, the soft soil of Stratford, the slow-moving Avon, the hush of an English evening as twilight gathers across fields. Long after William Shakespeare's footsteps faded from the quiet lanes of Stratford upon Avon, his words continued to wander. They traveled slowly at first, by hand-copied manuscripts, by whispered lines on candlelit stages, by readers who turned the pages of well-worn books late into the evening. Over time, they found homes in many hearts, in many languages, in many lands. What is remarkable is not just the brilliance of his writing, but a warmth it carries, the quiet familiarity in his reflections on love, friendship, time, and loss. Even as centuries passed and the world changed in ways he could never have imagined, something about Shakespeare's words remained softly unchanged. They speak not to the grand sweep of history alone, but to the gentle rhythms of life as we each live it. The passing of seasons, the longing for connection, the comfort of stories told in a familiar voice. After his death in 1616, his fellow actors and friends, John Heminges and Henry Condell, took on the delicate task of gathering his plays into a single volume. This collection, known as the First Folio, was published in 1623. Without it, many of his works might have been lost. Their labor was not loud or boastful. It was a gesture of deep respect, like laying wildflowers on a grave. Thanks to their quiet care, future generations would come to know Macbeth, Julius Caesar, As You Like It, and so many more. As the years rolled gently forward, Shakespeare's words found new voices. His plays were performed in village halls and royal palaces, on ship decks, and in open-air theaters beneath starry skies. His characters became old friends to audiences far and wide, not because they were grand, but because they felt real. Falstaff's laughter, Viola's hope, Cordelia's honesty, they lingered softly like echoes in a garden. Educators read his lines aloud in classrooms. Readers whispered his sonnets on quiet evenings. Actors breathed new life into his roles again and again. And all the while Shakespeare's presence remained not just on the page, but in the hush between the lines, in the gentle pause before a monologue, the stillness of a curtain rising, the calm after a final bow. What makes his legacy so enduring is not simply the cleverness of his plots or the elegance of his language, but the kindness with which he observed the world. He saw the sadness behind a smile, the strength within a quiet heart, the beauty in things left unsaid. His work invites us not to judge, but to understand, not to rush, but to listen. And so, his influence stretched onward, century after century. In small bookshops tucked away on cobbled streets, his plays found new readers. In theaters from London to Tokyo, his characters walked the stage once more. And in bedrooms, living rooms, and study corners, people continued to turn his words over in their minds like smooth stones in a pocket. Today, William Shakespeare is often called the greatest writer in the English language. But such titles, while true, seem a little too sharp for a man whose spirit feels so gentle. Perhaps it's better to think of him as a companion, one who walks beside us quietly, sharing stories that help us see the world with softer eyes. He never demanded attention. He simply offered it. He looked closely at the lives around him, noticed the smallest things, a glance, a hesitation, a sudden laugh, and turned them into something lasting, something beautiful. Even now, more than 4 centuries since he laid down his pen, his voice can be heard, not in shouts or speeches, but in soft murmurs, in the quiet space of a bedtime story, in the warm hush of a thoughtful moment, in a way a simple phrase like "all the world's a stage" can feel as if it was written just for you. And in that way, he remains with us. Not as a figure set in marble or a name etched only in textbooks, but as a storyteller, gentle, curious, and kind. A presence you can turn to when the world feels too loud. A voice that reminds you of the beauty of language, the grace of listening, and the peace found in a well-told tale. So as you settle into sleep, know that you share a long tradition, one where words drift softly through time from one dreamer to another. And perhaps, somewhere under starlight, Shakespeare's spirit still smiles, content to know that his stories continue, whispered softly in the night,